When you go to see a magic show, there's this almost silent, almost sacred agreement between you and the illusionist on stage.
Right.
Like when they put an assistant in a wooden box and bring out the handsaw, your logical brain knows the person isn't actually being cut in half. You know there's a trap door.
Yeah, hidden compartment or something.
Exactly, a hidden compartment, a very well rehearsed script at play. But when the saw goes through the wood, your breath still catches, you gasp.
Because you actively choose to suspend your disbelief.
Right.
The thrill of the illusion, that fleeting rush of experiencing absolute magic, is exactly what you walked into the theater to feel.
Yeah.
You don't jump on stage, grab the microphone, and scream that it's a trick.
No, you sit in the dark and let yourself be fooled.
Yeah, you're buying an experience, and the currency you pay with is your own critical thinking. Turning off your internal auditor in that exact moment is mandatory, because holding onto the truth, like calculating the dimensions of the trapdoor, would completely ruin the emotional payoff you're so desperately seeking.
And I mean, that dynamic, that conscious choice to step into an illusion and close the door behind you, is the entire focus of our deep dive today.
But we are looking at this phenomenon far, far away from a Vegas stage.
Way far away. We are examining it in the incredibly messy, high-stakes arena of modern romance. We are pulling from a deeply analytical essay and a specific case study that dissects the relationship between a woman referred to in our sources as 045 and a younger man pseudonymously named Zhang Sam.
So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yes, let's unpack this, because our mission today is to explore the mind-bending psychology behind the active choice of, well, choosing not to know.
To even begin to understand this case study, we have to completely dismantle the traditional narrative we default to when someone gets caught in a relationship trap.
Right, because normally when we hear a story about someone being deceived by a romantic partner or a player, our immediate reflex is pity.
Exactly. We assume a deficit of information. The classic response is to think, oh, they were simply too naive to see the glaring red flags waving in their face.
We treat them like gullible victims who just accidentally stumbled off a cliff in the dark.
But the source material forces us to throw that assumption out the window entirely. 045 is not operating in the dark.
No, not at all. Let's look at her profile for a second. She was born around 1998, so in the context of our current digital landscape, that makes her an absolute internet native. She's Gen Z.
And that demographic detail is the bedrock of this entire analysis. She did not grow up in an information vacuum where dating dynamics were some big mystery.
Yeah.
She grew up with the collective cynicism of the entire internet right in her pocket. She's been steeped in relationship discourse, Reddit threads, TikTok exposes, and endless forum posts detailing every conceivable way people manipulate each other.
She is highly internet literate. On top of that, she brings her own heavy lived experience to the table. Our source notes she has a history of past relationship trauma. She's navigated the emotional complexity of an abortion, and currently she's wrestling with a very specific, intense age anxiety of being 28.
She feels the clock ticking loudly.
Definitely. And because she's so plugged into the culture, she knows the prevailing internet wisdom of her generation cold. And the absolute golden rule of modern dating that she is fully aware of is this: an enthusiastic, proactive man is 100% a scammer or a player. Like, there are no exceptions.
It is treated not as a theory, but as an established, undeniable axiom in her digital circles. The source actually captures this cultural mindset perfectly by bringing in a wonderfully blunt quote from the writer Yu Hua.
Oh, the one about the dog.
Yes. A man's sweet talk is like a dog barking. You don't need to listen to it. That is the cognitive environment 045 lives in. She knows the dog is barking.
Right.
She has the data, the case studies, and the peer reinforcement to know exactly what an aggressive advance from a younger man looks like.
It's like getting an email that is clearly a phishing scam, knowing exactly what it is, but deliberately clicking the link anyway just to see what the website looks like.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Which brings us to the central friction of this whole dynamic. If 045 has all this information, right, if she has the hard-earned internet savvy to spot a manipulator from a mile away, and she knows the golden rule about enthusiastic men, why does she engage with Zhang San at all?
Right.
Why doesn't she just hit block the second he starts acting out the classic script?
What's fascinating here is that to crack that puzzle, we have to stop interrogating what 045 knows and start analyzing what 045 wants.
Okay.
We have to pivot from logic to the overwhelming gravitational pull of emotional craving. She walks into Zhang San's setup because her raw desire to experience the feeling of the relationship simply overpowers her internal risk assessment algorithms.
We need to dig into that craving because it has to be incredibly powerful to override years of ingrained internet cynicism and personal trauma. What exactly is she getting out of this?
Validation. Specifically, she craves the visceral feeling of being firmly chosen. Think about her context again. The past trauma and the heavy weight of turning 28 have created this deep well of insecurity.
She is quietly terrified that her value is diminishing, that she missed her window.
Exactly. She needs to know she still possesses romantic currency. And into that exact vulnerability steps Zhang San, executing what the source describes not as a clumsy advance, but as a perfectly paced architectural script.
Let's break down the mechanics of that script, because it's not just a guy aggressively flirting at a bar.
No, not at all. It's a calculated progression designed to bypass standard defenses. There's the initial meeting, followed by a period of gradual warming up. He doesn't rush.
Right.
He introduces physical closeness incrementally, building comfort, before finally transitioning to staying over. It happens at a rhythm that feels undeniably validating.
Oh, wow.
This execution provides her with a crucial psychological asset, which is value confirmation. It proves to her, in a tangible way, that despite her anxieties and scars, she is still highly attractive, desirable, and capable of being aggressively pursued by a younger partner.
She is essentially outsourcing her self-esteem repair to a dynamic she suspects is manufactured. But this brings up a massive mechanical question for me.
What's that?
If she knows, even subconsciously, that he is just running a playbook or a script, how does the emotional payoff actually work? Doesn't knowing the trick ruin the magic entirely?
That is where we have to look at how the human brain manages cognitive dissonance. It's the psychological mechanism of compartmentalization. The force refers to this as putting reality on hold.
Putting reality on hold.
Yeah, she doesn't hold the truth of his manipulation and the joy of the romance in her conscious mind at the same time.
Oh.
She actively creates an illusion of destiny by selectively suspending her own rules.
So going back to the golden rule, the one that says enthusiastic guys are scammers.
She consciously chooses not to use that rule to test Zhang San's behavior. If she applied that standard, she would immediately have to admit he's following a script.
And the second she admits that, the immersive illusion shatters. The value confirmation just evaporates. It makes me think of putting on a virtual reality headset. You can boot up a game where you were standing on a wooden plank at the top of a 100-story skyscraper. Your logical brain is fully aware that you were standing on the carpet in your living room.
Right, you know it's not real.
You know it's just pixels and code. But when you look down, your palms start to sweat, your heart rate spikes, you feel genuine vertigo. You could take the headset off at any moment, but you choose to leave it on because you want the physiological thrill. You literally wall off the reality of your living room to experience the high of the simulation.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. She is wearing a headset, and the source material highlights this profound psychological trade-off. How engaged you are in passion is proportional to how painful the consequences will be.
Wow.
The underlying argument is that passion, like true immersive infatuation, literally requires a temporary suspension of risk assessment. You cannot be an auditor and a romantic simultaneously.
No, you really can't.
If you are constantly running background checks and interrogating every compliment for hidden motives, you cannot get the emotional high. To feel the rush of the VR game, you have to temporarily forget the carpet beneath your feet.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because she isn't just oblivious to the carpet. She knows it's there.
Right. She subconsciously knows the background setting of this relationship. She is aware it is likely temporary and probably isn't going to end in a lifelong commitment. But she takes that heavy, cynical truth and she forcefully shoves it backstage.
She closes the curtain on it.
Exactly. She closes the curtain so she can sit in the front row and fully, completely absorb the joy of the present moment.
Think about how often we all do this in our own lives, even on a smaller scale. We all rent out our disbelief when we want something badly enough. Maybe it's taking a job that has glaring red flags in the interview process, but the title is exactly what we want for our ego, so we just ignore the warning signs.
We've all been there.
We consciously compartmentalize the risk because the immediate psychological payoff is too alluring to pass up. 045 is just running this mechanism on a much grander, more emotionally perilous scale.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it requires a complete paradigm shift in how we view someone in 045's position. It moves her from being a passive, naive victim of deceit to being the active architect of her own emotional experience.
Yeah.
She isn't being blindfolded and led into the dark by Zhang San. She is consciously choosing to close her eyes because she desperately needs to feel the warmth of the sun on her face.
Okay, but this paradigm shift introduces a serious, almost uncomfortable dilemma. If we fully accept that 045 is doing this consciously, that she is intentionally trading her logic for an emotional high carry, what is our responsibility?
You mean as outsiders?
Yeah, let's pivot from her internal mental state to the external world looking in. If friends, family, or the author of the source material see her actively making this deliberate choice to walk into a manufactured script, what is the moral obligation of the bystander?
Well, the source takes a highly specific and frankly very disciplined ethical stance on this. The instruction for the observer is to respect, bless, and stand by.
Stand by.
Yes. It advocates for a position of non-intervention, literally watching from the sidelines with folded arms.
Folded arms. See, I'm going to push back heavily on that. That sounds incredibly callous. If I see a friend walking into a situation where I know they're being manipulated and I know it's going to end in a crash, folding my arms feels like a betrayal of the friendship.
I get that.
What if the stakes are higher than just a bruised ego? What if this relationship leads to financial ruin or another traumatic event? Shouldn't the default moral position be to intervene and pull the VR headset off their face?
This raises an important question about the fundamental nature of autonomy and the actual utility of intervention. The source argues fiercely that respect, bless, and stand by is not a position born of coldness or apathy. It is a fully formed ethical framework based on agency.
But how does letting someone get hurt equal respecting their agency?
Because 045 is a fully realized adult. She possesses the same access to information as the bystander. She has assessed the risks in her own specific, highly personalized way. You might look at her risk assessment matrix and conclude it's flawed or heavily discounted in favor of emotional validation,
Sure.
but it is fundamentally her decision matrix. The core argument here is that if that destiny filter eventually breaks and she falls back to earth and gets hurt, that pain is not a tragic accident. That pain is the agreed upon price of admission for the experience she chose to have.
So the heartbreak isn't a glitch in the system, it's just the bill finally arriving for the meal she knowingly ordered.
Precisely. And the bystander must maintain the integrity of their own boundaries. The author of the source material emphasizes that they will continue on their own trajectory, making their videos, writing their analytical notes, conducting their interviews. They remain securely on their path while 045 walks her parallel path.
And those lines do not cross.
They do not cross. The observer does not derail their own life to cross a boundary and save someone who hasn't asked to be saved, and crucially, someone who is actively manufacturing their current reality.
I understand the logic, but it's a difficult pill to swallow. Culturally, we are deeply conditioned to be saviors. If we see a car veering off the road, our instinct is to grab the steering wheel. But what I'm hearing is that in this psychological context, grabbing the wheel is actually a profound violation.
It is a violation because it strips the person of the very thing they were trying to exercise, which is their own complex agency. Think about the mechanics of trying to intervene. If you aggressively point out Zhang San's script, 045 is likely to just double down.
Oh, absolutely. She will build a higher wall to protect the illusion because she isn't ready to let go of the validation yet.
Exactly. When she eventually does leave the script, the source predicts it won't be because a bystander finally presented her with enough logical evidence. It will be because she has simply experienced enough.
The battery of her self-esteem has been recharged enough, the novelty of the VR game has worn off, and playing along with the script suddenly feels more exhausting than validating.
Yes, the emotional utility of the relationship expires. And when she reaches that point organically on her own timeline, she will be able to look back at the situation and say, you know, I actually knew all along, but I chose not to know.
That realization completely re-engineers the narrative of the aftermath.
It does. It shifts the power dynamic of her own memory.
Instead of sitting in the wreckage feeling like a gullible fool, a pathetic victim who was duped by a younger guy's playbook, she retains total ownership of her journey. She becomes the undisputed author of her own story.
Right.
She can say, I was in a dark place, I needed a specific emotional experience to feel valued, I knew the cost of that experience, I paid it in full, and now I am moving on.
which is arguably the ultimate form of self-actualization, to be able to recognize your own capacity for self-deception, not as a humiliating weakness, but as a psychological tool you temporarily deployed to navigate a difficult emotional period. The author explicitly points out that there is zero need for a bystander to swoop in and say, I told you so, or to attempt to redefine her experience for her after it ends. She will realize she held the power to decide when the illusion started and when it ended, all along.
It reframes what society typically labels a mistake into a highly necessary, albeit painful, stepping stone. We have covered some incredibly dense psychological territory today.
We really have.
Let's synthesize where we've been. We started by tearing down the myth of the naive victim, examining 045 as a highly literate, internet-savvy individual who knows the exact shape of a red flag but chooses to walk past it anyway.
And we then dug into the mechanics of that choice. We explored how the desperate human craving for value confirmation, for the feeling of being undeniably chosen, can completely override rational thought. We looked at the necessity of compartmentalization, how the brain puts reality on hold to fully engage with the passion of an illusion.
And finally, we tackled the heavy ethical implications of the bystander. We explored the difficult, counterintuitive, but ultimately respectful stance of blessing and standing by, allowing another adult the dignity of walking into their own meticulously constructed trap, experiencing the fallout, and claiming total ownership of their own recovery.
So true.
So, what does this all mean when we step back from the case study? It challenges us to recognize that human behavior is rarely driven by a simple lack of information. We are endlessly complex, emotionally hungry creatures. We all possess the capacity to walk right into our own Zhang San scripts, trading our cold, protective logic for a fleeting but deeply necessary emotional experience.
Definitely.
Think back to the magic show we discussed at the start. Maybe the point of navigating human relationships isn't to be the smartest person sitting in the audience, aggressively calculating the dimensions of the trapdoor and ruining the illusion for yourself and everyone else. Maybe, sometimes, the psychological utility lies in just letting yourself gasp at the trick.
Because eventually, the curtain always falls. The stage lights come up, the illusion dissolves, and you have to walk out of the theater and back into the harsh reality of the street.
Right.
But the memory of that magic, the emotional high it gave you, and the profound understanding of why you needed to feel it in that specific moment, that belongs entirely to you.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over long after this deep dive is finished. If we accept that someone like 045 is the active architect of her own illusion, it threatens to upend everything we've been taught about protecting the people we care about.
It really does.
So ask yourself, are our most painful mistakes actually just secret experiences our subconscious decided we desperately needed to have in order to fully understand ourselves? Does true human freedom ultimately mean having the absolute, undeniable right to author our own heartbreak without anyone stepping in to save us?